Hey guys, it's Leandra, and today I'm going to be doing a review of Tales from the Shadowhunter Academy by Cassandra Clare, Maureen Johnson, Sarah Rees, Brennan, and Robin Wasserman. Before I even get started with the synopsis of this book, before I delve into my thoughts on each of the individual stories, quick disclaimer: if you haven't read the Mortal Instruments series from beginning to end, especially the last book, even just the synopsis of Tales from the Shadowhunter Academy is going to spoil you about what happens in the last book. So if you haven't read the last book in the Mortal Instruments series, then I recommend that you don't watch this video, but maybe go read the books first, or if you don't mind being spoiled, that's fine. Some of these short stories will also include mini spoilers to some of the things that happens in the Infernal Devices series, so if you haven't read that either, you can obviously still watch my review, but you will get a much more satisfying and deep read of this whole series if you first go read those books and then read the Tales of the Shadowhunter Academy. It's best if you don't spoil yourself. But without further ado, let's get into Tales from the Shadowhunter Academy. Tales from the Shadowhunter Academy follows Simon Lewis, who is one of the main protagonists from the Mortal Instruments series. In the final book of the Mortal Instruments series, his immortality and vampirism was actually taken from him by a demon. Also, all of his memories were erased from the Shadow World. In the very final chapter of the Mortal Instruments series, it is kind of touched upon that Izzy and Clary and Magnus and all these people are trying to get Simon to actually become a Shadowhunter, because after the Dark War, they are actually looking for more people who have the potential to become Shadowhunters, just because all of the Shadowhunter numbers have dropped so much since the huge war with Sebastian. This book basically includes 10 short stories about Simon's journey going to the Shadowhunter Academy all the way up to his potential Ascension Day. Overall, I absolutely love this book. I think that each of the short stories was really well crafted. It wove the stories of TID and TMI together very well. It gave us some insight on what happened in the past, and overall it was a very satisfying read. And it was obviously also really cool, you know, seeing Simon, who went from being a human to a vampire to a person who has the mark of Cain to, you know, someone who isn't a vampire anymore, but who is now trying to be a Shadowhunter. I think Simon Lewis, like, just personally, I think that he's gone through so much, and I think it's just very nice that Cassandra Clare decided to write this book of short stories so that we get his tale sort of wrapped up and we know what happens to him, which is very nice. These short stories were originally released, I think, once a month. I read this on my Kindle each month when they came out, but I have to say that getting this bind up and then actually rereading all these short stories after previously reading TMI, TID, and the Bane Chronicles, it was way more satisfying overall. And I think that when you read these short stories and don't leave too much time between each short story when you're reading it, it reads a lot more like a novel than it did when I was reading the individual short stories on my Kindle, when it felt more like just like short stories that didn't really fit together that well. So if you've read the short stories, I would highly recommend that you pick up a bind-up copy of all of these short stories, since it was just so satisfying to me to read all of these stories. As I said before in my Bane Chronicles review, I think that these short stories just fill up these small gaps that Cassie has left open for us, which, you know, gives us information that we didn't know we wanted, but we want. Story number 1, Welcome to the Shadowhunter Academy, gives us a short introduction into Simon traveling to the Shadowhunters Academy, meeting people there like Beatrice and Julie, meeting another guy who then ends up becoming his best friend in the series, George Lovelace, and also John Cartwright, who turns out to be a bully. And it's basically just about Simon, you know, establishing himself in the Shadowhunter Academy, going from, in the beginning, being a very privileged person, because obviously, like, he was a very famous character from the Dark War, like, everyone knows about him, everyone knows that he fought alongside Clary and Jace, deciding to join the Dregs, who are basically the mundanes who are ascending to be Shadowhunters. In the Shadowhunter Academy, the academy itself is kind of split into 2 cliques. There are the Shadowhunters, who are going to the Shadowhunter Academy to train and become better Shadowhunters and eventually join respective institutes so that they get their places for assignment, and the mundanes, who aren't Shadowhunters, but who at the end of their training in the Shadowhunter Academy will drink from the Mortal Cup and ascend to be Shadowhunters. Shadowhunters have a very kind of privileged attitude towards their own blood, and they obviously think that they are superior to mundanes because they have angel blood along with human blood. They kind of separate themselves from mundanes and sort of look at them as lesser class, which is obviously really sad and very, very disturbing. But Simon, who, you know, at the beginning was seen as a hero despite him being a mundane, ends up going to the dregs, who are the mundanes, who aren't Shadowhunters yet, and befriending those people instead and distancing himself from the hateful attitude of, you know, the elitish kind of Shadowhunters. He also moves in with George Lovelace, who is then his roommate, and the two of them hit it off very, very well. Overall, I really enjoyed this introduction to the Shadowhunter Academy setting. I think that it set the tone for the book very nicely. It also introduced us to the important characters in the series. Obviously, we're only at the beginning of Simon's tale, but it's still very, very nice to see that establishment, and it does lay a very good foundation for the following chapters. The second story, The Lost Herondale, actually follows Simon listening to Katarina Loss, who is the warlock teacher at the Shadowhunter Academy, about the Lost Herondale. A very, very long time ago, Tobias Herondale fled from his post and he abandoned, you know, his duty as a Shadowhunter. What happened was his wife was actually executed instead of Tobias because of the crimes that he committed. However, she was actually pregnant at the time. Like, the Shadowhunters obviously didn't care about that, which is just like so mind-blowingly fucked up. And it's basically about Katrina telling Simon that she actually saved the baby that was about to be born, and she actually took the child to a safe place and raised him. It was just such a heartbreaking story to me. First of all, obviously, because one of the reasons why the Shadowhunters decided to bring in that story was actually to warn the Shadowhunters about, you know, what would happen if you abandoned your post. But it was so sad because it is incredibly hard to like read about, you know, someone who is pregnant like being executed without the Shadowhunters actually caring about that person. It was very, very hard for me to read that, but it was also really cool that Katarina, you know, opened herself up to Simon about that secret of hers. The Whitechapel Fiend, which is the third short story in Tales from the Shadowhunter Academy, is actually about Tessa Gray coming to the Shadowhunter Academy and telling the students the story of her and Will chasing down Jack the Ripper in London. This story was actually quite disturbing, obviously because the demon that Tess and Will and stuff have to find actually ended up being like a young girl who was looking for a mother, and that's why she was ripping open these prostitutes and taking out like their organs, which is just like so horrifyingly disturbing on so many levels. But it was very interesting. It was obviously really cool to see Cassie, you know, intricately weave together like the Shadowhunter world with like kind of real life events, or at least like mysteries, which, you know, we all know about. It was very interesting to read about it, and it was obviously really cool to see Tess and Will in action. And yeah, I did really enjoy the story. I thought it was very interesting. It was also really nice having Simon, you know, connect with Jace to a certain extent, and it was nice seeing them talk to each other. Nothing But Shadows, the fourth story, follows James Herondale, who is the son of Tess and Will, and his time at the Shadowhunter Academy and how he really struggled to fit in and how he made like some really good friends. I absolutely loved the story. First of all, because James Herondale is just so adorable, and we also saw him in the Bane Chronicles, and I was really interested in learning more about him. Second of all, we see so many other children from the TID series. First of all, we have Matthew Fairchild, who is the son of Charlotte and Henry Fairchild. Then we have Christopher Lightwood, who is the son of Cecily Herondale and Gabriel Lightwood. And last but not least, we see Thomas Lightwood, who is the son of Gideon Lightwood and Sophie. And it was just so adorable seeing all of these children, seeing these like products of this like true love that we see in TID. It was so adorable, and it was really cute having them all, you know, like seeing the four of them talk to each other and connect and becoming friends and hating each other and being friends again. Matthew and James becoming pair battalion in the end was just so sweet. And I really, really loved the story. It was so heartwarming. It was also so sad seeing James, you know, deal with like his special powers that he really hates. And it was just really nice seeing, you know, Matthew accepting him for who he really is, and seeing that friendship blossom between the two of them. And obviously this is also the story where Simon then eventually decides that he wants Clary as his parabatai, which is just so sweet on so many levels, and it made me so excited to read that. And it gave me so much hope for Simon and his future, and I really loved the story. I think it was probably my favorite story out of all of them. The fifth story, The Evil We Love, actually follows Valentine and how the circle was formed. Robert Lightwood comes to the Shadowhunter Academy to tell the story about how the circle was formed, and you know, it's just like sort of like a cautious story as to how these kind of power groups can, you know, arise very, very easily. This was such an interesting story because it actually gave us insight as to how the circle was formed and the kind of relationships that the people in the circle had together, and it also gave us some insight into, you know, Robert and what happened between him and his parabatai. Michael basically tells Robert that he is gay and has been in love with Robert, and Robert basically pushes him away, and it also talks about how, you know, Robert regrets that for the rest of his life, and it was just so heartbreaking to see that happen and to read about that. I think that this story just brings up so many deep topics from, you know, the past, from the Mortal Instruments series, and I really, really liked it so much. Pale Kings and Princes gives us the story of how Andrew Blackthorne fell in love with a fairy woman called Nerissa, and how Helen Blackthorne and Mark Blackthorne were actually born from that woman and him, and it just tells us the story of how he fell in love with the fairy, how he was captured, and how actually the fairy actually really, really loved Andrew, and how Andrew actually really loved the fairy, and how she actually made him believe that he didn't love her, and it was so heartbreaking as well. It just made me feel so many things on so many levels, and I really loved the story. Bitter of Tongue is actually about Simon being accidentally kidnapped by the fairies and actually seeing Mark Blackthorne. This is the first time that we actually see Mark Blackthorne since the time that he was taken by the Wild Hunt in the last book of the Mortal Instruments series, and it was really, really hard, you know, to see him, his like spirit being crushed, you know, him slightly changing, the fact that he still cared so much about his family. It was just so heartbreaking to see that. We also see Helen and Aline getting married together, and it was so cute to see that happen. Obviously, the situation of Helen and Aline's like relationship, and like where the fact that Helen is sort of like secluded to the island, it's obviously really sad to hear about that, but it was so sweet to have that like moment of happiness and love and affirmation and commitment within all of these sort of like more disturbing topics in Tales from the Shadowhunter Academy, and it was obviously so sweet that the two of them found their happy ending together. But obviously it also made me really sad to see, you know, what the Clave was doing to Helen because of who she is as a half fairy, and I definitely hope that all of this prejudice and all of these issues are going to be resolved or somehow dealt with in Queen of Air and Darkness, and I don't remember whether she's writing another series after The Dark Artifices, but I definitely hope so. The Fiery Trial is actually about Simon and Clary going to Emma and Julian's parabatai ceremony. They are both respectively asked to be like the partners of Emma and Julian so that they can witness the ceremony taking place, and it is also about Clary and Simon going through what the Clave calls the Fiery Trial, which tests two people's ability to be parabatai. From the previous stories, we learned that Simon obviously wants to become parabatai with Clary, and the Fiery Trial is basically just this test of compatibility that the Clave has to do in order to see whether two people can be parabatai, and it has to be done unknowingly of the two people. So Clary and Simon both basically both have to drink water from Lake Lynn. They were both put through this like test where they were emotionally tested to all of their sort of like mental capabilities and to like the fact that they could find each other even within that trial, and it was just really heartwarming to see that happen. And it is also super, super interesting because obviously at the parabatai ceremony of Julian and Emma, you kind of see these like small hints of things that are then revealed in the Dark Artifices. I'm not going to spoil anyone if you guys are reading this in publication order, but obviously something happens in the Dark Artifices, and there are definitely foreshadowing signs of that in this short story. Born to End This Night was such a cute story because Alec and Magnus find this abandoned warlock child. This story was also so heartwarming because it delves into also like some very, very deep topics. You know, the fact that Magnus and Alec, how ready they are to adopt a child, and in the end they decide to keep the child. They decide to even call it Max, which is just so heartwarming, and it brings up so many memories again, and it was just so sad and happy at the same time. But obviously I love this story. It was so cute to see the two of them care so much about this child. It really, really brought brought like the family together as well. Both of the Lightwood parents were so enamored by this child, and it was just really sweet to see that. This is also where Simon kind of talks to Alec about, you know, the fact that Alec has been sort of treating him a bit strangely, and Alec basically reveals to Simon that he feels very, very in debt to Simon because Simon basically saved Magnus's life. And it was just so heartwarming to read about that as well, and it was just so cute how Alec opened up to Simon, and it kind of, you know, brought their relationship to a whole nother level, and it was really nice to see that. I really just appreciate these small character moments where, you know, two characters open up towards each other. And then we have the last short story, Angels Twice Ascending, which is about Simon's ascension ceremony and how basically he ends up becoming a Shadowhunter. This story was so emotionally charged as well. Like, I honestly don't think that there was a single story in this book that didn't have me emotionally fucked up to so many levels. It was just so cute. It was obviously so heartbreaking to see George not make it in the ceremony. I think that was probably the hardest thing in the whole book. And it was obviously so sweet how Simon then eventually takes on the name of Lovelace in order to honor George. I was very happy to know that, you know, Simon made the Ascension ceremony and then becomes a Shadowhunter. And it was obviously so sweet because you see the ghost of Jessamine and George at the end of the story, you know, walking off together, which is what triggers Simon to choose the name Lovelace for himself. And it was so heartbreaking, but really nice at the same time. And I just love those kind of like bittersweet moments that Cassie writes. I really live for those kind of moments. And obviously Simon and Isabel spend the night together and he loses his virginity to her, and it was really sweet, and it was really nice for them to have a happy ending together. And in a way, I really like how that happened before Simon got his memories back, because it sort of just showed that Isabel and Simon, you know, fell in love again, that they were compatible with each other, and that they were able to form that relationship without having to wait for his memories to come back. But it was obviously really nice to have his memories also come back when he ascended, and I'm just so happy that he got his memories back, that he can live a normal life. Well, normal, right, as a Shadowhunter. Alright, that was it for my Tales from the Shadowhunter Academy review. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. I bring videos out every week. Let me know whether you've read Tales from the Shadowhunter Academy and which story was your favorite one. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope that you guys are having a great day, and I will see you guys soon with another video. Bye!